let's look at the question of NAMA, the third great myth. Now, I have to say something about this because, as a Marxist, you're often accused of being crude and you don't quite understand the complexity of the world. But Irish capitalism, they don't mess around. They're just so crude, it's unbelievable. Right? Where did the idea of NAMA come from? An economist called Peter Bacon. Right? Peter Bacon was such a brilliant economist. In 2001, he wrote a report on Ireland's property market. And you all know the results, what happened afterwards, right? But what happened to him after 2001? Having been an economist, he decided, I've studied property, I may as well become a property speculator. So he went on to join the board of Ballymore Properties, which is owned by a man called Sean Mulryan, who made donations of £70,000 at a time, to Liam Lawler, the corrupt Fianna Fáil TD. So Peter Bacon is sitting on the board of Ballymore Properties. He's the international director of it. He's running the operation in Slovakia, building the apartment blocks, borrowing property from Anglo-Irish Bank, and sending out to stoke up the property market in Slovakia. And then the crash comes. And Fianna Fáil says, who we get to write a report that's going to help our friends in the building industry? I know an economist. The guy was an economist some years ago, Peter Bacon. So Peter Bacon puts away his construction clothes, puts back on the pinstripe suit, turns up as a wise economist and says, I've got a plan, which is called NAMA, which is going to save the Irish property and banking market. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. You just couldn't make it up. And Bacon's plan is to set up NAMA, which will take 90 billion off the banks and will hand that bad debt over to the Irish people, and we will then take responsibility for the bad debt. And you all know what's going to happen on that. Let me, however, just introduce another devious aspect. So when you read boring reports, you find some really devious stuff. When I actually read Bacon's report on this great plan, there's a little bit in the middle that deals with a problem. What if the Irish people take over the assets of, let's say, you didn't much too polite to say it, Anglo-Irish Bank, and they've got loans out for property blocks in Slovakia, Bucharest, and these property apartment blocks are only half built. So what's the use taking them over? We've only got half-built apartment blocks. That's no good to us. What we'll have to do is give loans to the property developers, because nobody else will give them loans. The Irish people will give them loans, so they can finish off the apartment blocks in Bucharest, and then in 10 or 15 years, we may get some of our money back. Again, unbelievable. So they've put it down here. NAMA is going to rescue not just all the banks, but all the big developers. Okay? This is what is actually happening in terms of NAMA. Now, the tragedy is, and these figures are by the way conservative, is that this is going to cost the Irish people, or the people who live in Ireland, better way of putting it, 24 billion euros. Now, put that in context. The last budget in April, which slashed social welfare, brought in pensions, destroyed the number of, for example, teachers in schools and so on, that raised 4 billion euros. In other words, we will have a budget like we've had for April for 6 years in a row just to pay to rescue the banks. And worse than that, even before we get to that stage, we've already taken 80 billion, which is the debt of the banks, onto the state's debt. So the national debt of Ireland has jumped from 50 billion, which it was before NAMA, to 130 billion today. Okay? So Irish national debt has exploded because of NAMA. If you are an international financial shark that wants to give money, you've just looked at Ireland, it's gone up from 50 billion in debt to 130 billion in debt, you say it's a more risky proposition. So what do? You charge them higher levels of interest. And as a result of this, therefore, already we are paying an extra 2 billion a year just in interest to the international sharks that we actually borrow from. That's half of all the money raised in the April budget. So we're entered really quite a mad world at the moment. Okay, I'll say just very briefly on this, then we come to the genuine social solutions. Okay, the government says that when we come through all of this, we're then going to turn Ireland into a smart economy. We're going to be the knowledge economy of Europe. We're really going to be ahead of the game. Problem: 91% of our secondary schools don't have a lab attendant, right? If you want to get kids to learn science, it's a good idea to experiment, to play, trial and error and so on. You don't learn science by rote learning, right? But 91% of our schools don't have a lab attendant. what they're doing for the smart economy, and I see it very much in my own college, they have this idea that Ireland can jump over the rest of the world by recruiting international superstar scientists. You pay them 300,000, 250,000, you put around them a group of researchers, often relatively younger people, on casual contracts. I say in my college, 400 people, all on a casual contract, all will lose their jobs after 2 or 3 years, chucked on somewhere else. This is how they intend to bring the knowledge economy. You can't build a knowledge, and by the way, it's really a tax dodge for US corporate. You can't build a knowledge economy on 19th century casual labour conditions. Right. Now, that's the indictment of capitalism. So, what is the solution? Let's just go through these solutions. I want to advocate, and I advocate in this book, a number of solutions I think are practical. I want to say a word about the little word practical. When I say they're practical, I mean they're sensible. There's what human beings need in this country. It'll help stop suffering. However, James Connolly pointed out, when you use the word practical, you've got to be careful, because the word practical, he says, this is James Connolly, he says, it's often used to get you to think along the grooves and lines of those who oppress you. So, when you put up these proposals, you say, that's not practical, because the markets won't like it. That's how they put it. Will it be acceptable to the markets? And I think you have to formulate proposals that are not about the markets. The markets are a type of God that, if you like, dominate our lives, that I think we have to just demystify and see through. So these proposals are practical in terms they would work. We may have to get rid of capitalism to make them work, but they would work if you think about it logically. Right. First, stop the bank bailout. Right. We save ourselves 24 billion immediately. All this suffering for the next 6 years, it stopped. We simply stopped the bailout of the banks. If we did this, the private bank, the 6 main banks would go bankrupt. This is absolutely true, right? We would then, in that situation, have to pass an emergency law to seize all their assets, take their buildings, to transfer the staff in the banks to working for a good state bank. A good state bank is a bank that should be established with, let's say, 3 to 4 billion euros. We establish a good state bank with, like, as you said, the lines of a credit union. That state bank does what a bank is needed for, genuinely. I mean, I think that Simon there is right when he says a bank, you need credit in a modern society, you need credit. And there's no question of that. But you can have that credit provided by a good state bank that is banned from any engagement in speculation. So this would save vast numbers of money, but it would also allow the Irish economy to function. Now, one other point. You'll be told, oh, it's too late to do that now because the government passed a guarantee scheme for the foreign bondholders back in the 30th of September last year, so you can't do that. I believe that guarantee scheme should be torn up immediately. The guarantee scheme that the Irish government passed for the banks, guaranteeing about 450 billion, the legal advisors to the government was Arthur Cox. Arthur Cox was also working for Bank of Ireland at the same time. How can you do that, right? You should tear up that scheme and get on with stopping the bank bailout. With the money saved, the second proposal, we should have a major public works programme. I mean, this is to be honest, this is really moderate stuff. Japan at the moment has 10% of its workforce on a public works programme. It's had a very long recession, 10, 15 years in Japan. 7 million people in Japan are on a public works programme. In Roosevelt's America, 3 million people were on a public works programme. And the logic of this is, if you have a major recession, a capitalist will not invest in creating jobs for all the reasons I've talked about. So the only people who are going to create jobs is if the state intervenes and provides jobs to break the cycle of economic depression. And what we should do, I mean, these are only some ideas, I'm sure there's a vast number of other ideas if we all thought about it. I think we should do something about we could link up the 2 Lewis lines, couldn't we? Put in a proper rail network. Irish housing is very bad in terms of insulation, because most was done before building regulations came in. We should insulate those houses. Even the government says we have to move away from having a sort of a single GP, general practitioner doctor in a surgery, to having primary care health centres which integrate medical services. We could do all these things through a public works schemes, and you could do it with the money saved from bailing out the banks. Very sinister battle taking place in